Hello, everyone. Okay, today we're starting a new unit. This is Chapter 15, Darwin's Theory of Evolution. Okay, so your EQ is what patterns of biodiversity did Darwin observe while traveling aboard the Beagle? Okay, so today we're going to look at Charles Darwin and how his voyages helped him better understand and what was going on the planet. Okay, so first we're going to talk about some of the vocabulary you need to be familiar with. So here we've got the vocabulary. So you have to be familiar with these four vocabulary concepts. Okay, so there's evolution, which literally means the change over time. Okay, geologic evolution, gradual change of the Earth over long periods of time. For example, the Grand Canyon would be an example of geologic evolution. Organic evolution, a gradual change in the frequency of alleles within a it should be within a species over a long period of time. Modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. So organic evolution basically is the evolution of the living world, unlike geological evolution, which is basically the evolution of the Earth. Okay, then we see both happening. Theory is a tested concept that is supported by evidence or an explanation supported by evidence. So a theory is not what we think of as an idea. It's an idea supported by evidence. So if you have evidence to support, and a theory in science has to be supported by a lot of evidence to actually be considered a theory. So basically, it stays a hypothesis until it is proven by many scientists over and over again over long periods of time. Then we start calling things theories, and this usually takes somewhere around 50 to 100 years. Um, and generally, theories have to be extremely well supported, as we have seen with theories of black hole, or the theory of evolution, or the theory of theory of gravity. There's a lot of evidence supporting it. Theories of theory of relativity, all of these things are theories because they have never been disproved over long periods of time. Charles Darwin. Okay, so who was Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin was basically a rich kid that didn't know what he wanted to do. And his father, frustrated with him not wanting to study anything, actually got him on a ship, and he traveled around the world in the HMS Beagle, Her Majesty's ship, the Beagle, for 5 years. He wasn't too he was okay. Basically, what happened during those days was that the captains of ships were usually upper class, and everybody else that worked on the ship was lower class. So the ship captains needed someone to talk to. So he served that purpose to allow, because they wouldn't talk to their people because they were upper class. They couldn't talk to these riffraff, so they wouldn't interact with the lower class. So he served as a purpose to be a companion to the captain also. But in addition to that, he was a naturalist. He was hired on as the naturalist, which means he did all the collections of plants and creatures that they found out there. So he was collecting a lot of things. He was called the naturalist. And while he was doing this job, he made tremendously large observations. He kept very careful records. Um, and so he made lots of observations and collected fossils, as well as all kinds of samples from the places he'd been. And basically, after thinking about this for several years after returning to England, he proposed a revolutionary hypothesis about the way life changes over time, now known as the theory of evolution. And actually, this took him nearly his entire life to write. It was very hard for him to actually put this on paper. So we look into what is a theory. Okay, so once again, a theory is a well-supported, testable explanation of phenomena that have occurred in the natural world. Okay, so a couple of examples, further examples, so like the Big Bang theory, that the universe emerged from a tremendously dense and hot state and then spread out. That is a Big Bang theory, and that is like basically what we rely on in astronomy. Biology, we've got the cell theory, which is the fundament that cells are the fundamental units of structure and function in all living things. So far on this planet, the more we look, the more things we find with cells. So every time we find a new thing, it's always made out of cells. So it is something that is at the center of the study. Um, In chemistry, atomic theory, that matter is composed of discrete units called atoms. So chemistry is based on atomic theory. Climatology, the theory of global climate change. So an increase in average temperature of Earth's atmosphere. There's a lot of support towards supporting this. A lot of observation, a lot of tests that have been run over several, like over 20 years that people have been studying this. And basically, we've seen a lot of the things that are happening now were predicted by those studies, and we're actually living in it. Right now, we're actually starting to see the beginning of it. Okay, in geology, plate tectonic theory, large scale motions of the Earth's crust. We live those in California. They're called earthquakes. Basically, people felt earthquakes, and people started going out and looking at the Earth, and they came up with the theory of plate tectonics, that the Earth is made out of different plates that move. And so far, so good. Every time we go out into outer space, every time people look at the Earth's crust, they see those plates, or there's a lot of evidence supporting this. So, what is evolution? Evolution means a change over time. It's the process by which modern organisms have changed from ancient organisms. This picture here does not show like the evolution of humans. It just shows you present day gibbon, present day orangutan, present day chimp, present day gorilla, and present day man, human. So we can see that there are similarities in all of our skeletons, but we are different. But can these differences be attributed to changes over time that may have happened to one and not the other, or that we changed in different ways? So we have a lot of similarities that indicate that maybe there was something in common originally and that has changed for millions of years. So one of his biggest accomplishments was to basically collect a huge number of species, plants, animals that were well suited for where they lived. So he collected things that, like, if he went to a dry place, he got things that were from dry areas. When he went to a wet place, he got things that were well built for their areas. So he noticed not only the organism themselves, but noticed where he collected it from and made really good notes. Um, and he saw all kinds of ecosystems with different kinds of animals. So, like Argentina and Australia basically looked the same to him, very dry areas. But he saw that there were different kinds of things. Like in Australia, they had all these animals, like the dingoes and the kangaroos and things that were not in Argentina. Why? Why such a difference when the two places look virtually alike? Okay, so he questioned when he went to different places, but when he went to these islands off the coast of Peru called the Galapagos Islands that I hope to visit one day, he basically it's off the coast of Ecuador. It's at the 1,000 kilometers west of South America. It's 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. It's a group of islands that are close to Ecuador, but all of them are very different. Some of them had a lot of water and therefore a lot of plants, and a lot of animals, and other ones were really dry and only had a few plants and a few animals. Some of them were really dry. Some of them were really hot. Some of them had lots of rain. Some of them had little mountains on them. So these mountains were really different. So he found that the characteristics of many of the animals and plants that lived in these areas were very varied. They were very different types of animals and plants that lived in each of these islands, and so he wondered why, these islands are so different, yet they have different climates and they have different animals, but the islands are so close together and should be relatively the same. So he collected a lot of information from them, and he wondered why such big differences. So, here we've got some marine iguanas and some land iguanas that he looked at. These are all from different islands. And he noticed these and he's like, yeah, they're all iguanas. He noticed they were all iguanas, but he's like, why are they so different? Why is one of them this color? Why does one of them have some yellow? Why does one of them look like this? And they were very different looking iguanas in every different island. And he wondered what's the deal? So he collected these and started wondering these. So Darwin's hypothesis. Well, he wondered if all these organisms that looked alike, like the iguanas, for example, were once the same species. Did they have the same ancestor? Is this at all possible? So he started having thoughts like this, and he carried them back to England and thought about this for a long, long time. finally, you have four pictures here, and you just have to match these. And please make sure you write these down. Number six, seven, eight, and nine. Match them with the. Oh, is which one is a struggle for there is a struggle to survive. Living things overproduce. There is variation among offspring. And natural selection is always taking place. So see which picture represents each phrase and match them up and go ahead and add those to your notes also. Uh, we're going to continue with section two as soon as you finish with section one. So, Hutton and Lyell, how did they describe geologic change? Okay, so back in Darwin's time, there was he had studied geology. He had studied how the earth was laid down, and that at his time, they were just figuring out that those lines that they saw were actually layers of dirt on top of each other. Hutton and Lyell were like the prominent scientists in all of this. If you go and study geology, they still talk about Hutton and Lyell. Okay, so Hutton proposed that the Earth is millions of years old. Rock layers form slowly, rocks, mountains, valleys shaped by rain, wind, hot temperatures over long periods of time. So if you know of the geologic, like rock formation, the rock cycle and all that, he's the one that came up with all of this. Okay, so everything you've learned about like the earth and what's in dirt and what's in rock and all of that, you learned from Hutton. Hutton was the one that actually started all that. Lyell, Lyell, same. He basically thought, okay, over time, if you look back over time, the same things have been happening over and over and over again. Eruptions, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes have been happening. All the things we see today have been happening for a long time. So the earth has been shaped by this. So sometimes when it looks like this old thing that looks really like the Grand Canyon, and it looks like just like it's been eaten away by water and water and water. That's what it looks like if you look at it very carefully. Maybe that's exactly what happened. So this allowed Darwin um, to say, hey, maybe enough, the Earth is old enough for all of these things to have happened. Because one of the problems that Darwin had was that was raised in the belief that the Earth was only like 2,000 years old or very little. So when he studied geology and these geologists were saying, no, the Earth is much older because it would have taken a lot longer for these things to happen and make what we see today, that allowed him to think, okay, well, maybe there was enough time for evolution to happen. So Lamarck, he actually lived much before Darwin, and he came up with his own theory of evolution. He came up with two parts to it. There was the law of use and disuse, that new organisms in a species appeared as a result of actions of organisms as they use or fail to use body parts. In other words, he said that if you like use your right hand a lot, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Or if you stretch your neck a whole lot, like giraffes, for instance, that they start off as like horse looking things and then they just stretch their necks and over time they got longer and then they pass that on to their kids. So inheritance of acquired characteristics was that organisms, after they got like these longer and longer necks, they just like have babies and their babies even had longer necks. So by using their bodies in new ways, so he thought that basically you use something, it gets bigger, and then after some time you'll wind up with your kids having that bigger and stuff like that. So Darwin rejected this. He looked around the world and saw things being born and saw giraffes and saw elephants and saw little birds and trees and humans and noticed that this was not true. So he rejected this because it was not there was absolutely no evidence supporting this in nature. Okay, so the last person to influence Darwin, or that he actually considered, not the last one, but one of the things he also thought about as he was thinking of how things changed over time, was Malthus. Malthus was not actually a scientist at all. He was an economist. He studied humans and money, and he thought about like resources. So he thought about how the population was going. So he wrote books about how human population growth, if it continued unchecked, like there was no war, no famine, and by disease, there would not be enough food for everyone, not enough space, that everyone would eventually run out of these things. So run out of resources. So if the human population would go unchecked and grow and grow and grow, that we would run out of things. Well, what Darwin got out of this was that he thought that, hey, if humans can do that, why not everything else? Why not trees? Why not squirrels? Why not mountain lions? Why not beetles? Why, if they run out of water, wouldn't they run into the same thing? Or if they had too many, too many flies, would they run out of stuff to eat? So he basically applied an economic model to the natural world and thought, why don't if it happens to us, why not everything else? So that's what he got from Malthus.